Jesus and things like that. But there are times when the Father is speaking as well, where like the time is nigh, time is nigh, time is nigh. But we also know that the way that Father experiences time is not the same as us.
Yeah.
And I think that I think is kind of the aspect here. And Jessica, you actually came in right at the right time.
Oh, nice. That was lucky.
Talking about second
Second
coming
coming?
stuff. Yeah.
Yikes. Okay,
I
what
think
did I miss? Sorry, I got to readjust all my lighting because I
No,
left.
you're fine.
I left and I came back. So
and Jessica, welcome. I'm AJ Hill here, and
hi.
I'm Latter-day Saint on Fire. I don't know if you've seen me before, but on TikTok, but I'm
Oh
around.
yes, I have.
Okay, so the question that one of the things that so many people are so wrapped up in that moment that he comes that we forget just to be relaxed and have Jesus right here, right now kind of idea, and not
Mhm.
get so caught up. And a lot of times when we hear, like in 106, where the time is nigh for the second coming, and we're still 200 years departed from that moment that he speaks, basically, and we're still waiting for that nigh time. And are we so wrapped up in this kind of exhale so that we can finally say it's finally finished, and no longer do we have to really work real hard to maintain the kind of sanity that stay the course anyway.
So the question,
All day,
let
sorry
me
about
let me see if I'm following. The
Yeah, sure,
question
thank
is
you.
like, are we looking forward so much to like that final kind of like the millennial reign beginning that we're missing the moment? Is that the question?
That's a lot of it, but I'm just saying when we see the frequency in the Doctrine and Covenants where it talks about the nigh at hand kind of
Mhm.
situation, that even they were kind of delivered, even in the ancient times of the apostles, the original apostles, they were seeing this nigh at hand being like in their day, and I think
Yeah,
there's
like the nigh at hand has been going on for like a
2,000
really
years.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like I was just talking about this because all those guys that I was hanging out with over there with Jared from Christian Homestead, because this is like his main niche is Second Coming. So we were having like probably a 2-hour Second Coming discussion, just kind of offline. And we were kind of talking about this too, like how there's all of this. Okay, there's like different groups, right? Like just like with when in apologetics we're always talking about like different groups. Well, when you like drill it down to like the second coming niche, there's also different like camps or groups that people are in. There's kind of like that prepper group who just wants like disaster. They're just like waiting for disaster so they can use all the stuff that they prepped. It's like they're like really looking forward to it. And then there's the people who don't want it to ever come at all. And then there's the people who like want it to be tomorrow, think it's going to be tomorrow. And then there's the people who are like, no, it's not going to happen until XYZ because they have it all figured out. They have like their timeline. They've got it like all figured out. And I always just kind of feel like, is that you, AJ?
Yes. Well, I
Yeah.
got a guesstimation, so
I love talking timelines. I try not to get too like I guess dogmatic about it. But yeah, there's like all those little kind of niche groups. And I would say like for me, I don't know, I was literally just talking about this, but I was like, I always find myself sort of debating like on what prepared means, for me personally, because I think you see like the Lord telling these saints back in these sections of Doctrine and Covenants that they need to be prepared and that they need to do this. And then, we're 200 years later and it's like, well, they weren't, they obviously weren't there for the second coming. But I think sometimes we forget that there's work happening on both sides of the veil. And I feel like for me, that's really what these chapters come down to, is that there is a work that's happening on both sides of the veil, and that this gathering of Israel is something that's going to be both sides of the veil, because we're in sections 106, 107, and 108. And what's important here is 107 actually was like the third chapter chronologically, right?
you're smarter than us.
Well, those are the chapters you guys are doing, right? You're doing sections 106
Well, we
to
know it's
108, or are you
106,
doing
107,
109 and yeah? Okay, so like 107 chronologically comes like it's like the third chapter. So go look at the header for section 107 and notice how the timing of section 107 is like really out of place. This is one of those sections that's out of place. And what I think is really interesting about this, so this is Joseph Smith has this November 11th, 1831. Okay, but look at what it's sandwiched between. It's sandwiched between November 25th, 1834 is section 106. And then December 26th, 1835 is section 108. And I feel like there's kind of like this little structure happening here. One of the things that I think is really interesting about this is that you have the thief in the night chapter in like mentioned in section 106. And then you've got this thing that happened back in 1831 being mentioned here in section 107. Now, why is that happening? Well, it's because Joseph Smith is reading it. They think that he's like giving this to a group of brethren in 1835. So part of the chapter I think it was like later the verses, I can't remember which verses it was, but like there's a whole section of verses that they believe he received this as a revelation in 1831, and then he's kind of like paraphrasing and kind of like rehashing several things that happened back in 1831, and he's giving it to all of these guys in 1835. But why is he doing that? Well, we kind of know why, because they're setting up, like he's trying to help them understand this structure, that there's like these priesthood keys and what is the purpose of these things. He's getting that ecclesiastical structure set up. But why is he doing that? He's doing that because what's about to happen in the next chapters with the Kirtland Temple. And what that tells us is that this like thief in the night, nigh thing, all of that is because he has to do the welding links. Like he's got to put the welding links back in place. And you can't do that without priesthood keys. So first they have to restore the ecclesiastical structure. That's why you see Joseph and Oliver getting baptized, and then they get the Aaronic priesthood, and then they get the Melchizedek priesthood, and then he sets up the presidencies, and he starts setting up all the ecclesiastical hierarchical structure of the church, which is supposed to support the family. But then the family is the patriarchal order that gets restored with those keys of Moses, Elijah, and Elias. Right? Because Moses brings back the keys of the gathering of Israel. Elias gives the keys of, basically it's the gospel discipline. It's like celestial marriage. It's like those extra covenants on the covenant path beyond baptism. And then Elijah is the one who restores that sealing power. And so Joseph Smith had used this really good analogy to describe that. He gave like a building, an architecture analogy. And the analogy that he gave was, think of Moses and the keys of the gathering of Israel as kind of like you got to gather all the materials, like the raw materials, and bring them in the gate. And then Elias is like, you got to stack them all up, group them together. And then Elijah's like the sealing cement. And we can talk about that more in next week's Come Follow Me. But the reason that it's important to think about here is because it helps you understand that this whole nigh thing and this thief in the night, it's talking about something very specific that I think we tend to overlook. We think of it as we got to have food storage and we got to have all these things. But what it actually is talking about, if you really are paying attention to what the Doctrine and Covenants has been saying this entire time, is it's talking about restoring a family of God. It's talking about restoring a priesthood lineage and a covenant connection to Jesus Christ, who's the birthright son, who's the joint heir that we need to connect to be able to inherit and be exalted. And that's really what it's talking about. And I think that that's why you'll hear from the time of the apostles and the meridian of time, this phrase being mentioned and these things being mentioned, because it's actually talking about a covenant. And the climax kind of, it's all building up to that second coming of Jesus Christ when all things are gathered in one in Christ. But the reason that, I guess, we don't want to have our priorities out of whack, I guess is what I'm saying. It's like you want to focus on what it's actually saying. Like, what is it really telling you? Get to the deeper meaning, because I think we can all kind of get into that mindset of what it means to be quote unquote prepared for the second coming. But if you look at what the prophecies say, the prophecies are talking about you need to be sealed and welded together as an eternal family with Jesus Christ, who is your way back to the Father. And that's more, I think, I think to me that explains why you're seeing that language being used in all these dispensations. Does that make sense? I don't
No,
know.
it does.
Yeah,
It
I
does.
would, and another,
That was like
It
a
does.
mouthful.
there's another,
Always a mouthful.
there's another idea that just struck me is the idea that when the temple is built, then he's going to manifest himself to those who will be the audience at that time. And so there's kind of this, the time is nigh. You got to build the temple so that we can make this thing happen, kind of
Yeah.
attitude. And that this second coming that is going to be generated by uh, the the key bearers such as Moses, Elias, and Elijah, who will open up the doorway for us to start this process that is to take place before I am to be delivered to all mankind. So
Mhm.
Well, you know,
we're
Jess made
great ideas are, Jessica, for and it was wonderful that you a wonderful oration. That's what I'm trying to say. You just like
Aw.
hammered it all.
Well, instead, you made the great point, Jess. And I actually was pulling it up while you were talking because I didn't realize the chronology. But it said the next chapters that we get are literally the Kirtland dedication and then the Passover event when all the keys come. And 107 is literally, it said it's the breakdown. I mean, Monty can tell you, I sent him a screenshot because of a guy so that he knows what I'm talking about. But so like it literally breaks down the structure of how the priesthoods work.
Yep. Yep.
Hey, I have a diagram. Do you guys, if you
Let's
want,
see
I
it.
can pull it up.
Let's
Yeah,
I
see
want
it.
to see it.
let me
Let's
find
see the
it.
visual aids. I want to see the visual aids.
Okay, I'm gonna pull it
Alright.
up. I'm gonna pull up the diagram that we had the other day. It was really cool.
Mosiah finds picture
You guys
Yeah.
talk. You guys talk. I'm gonna go find it. It's in my pictures.
This is
Mosiah, I don't think that's gonna work quite as well.
Okay.
all right.
All
I'm not
right.
Jessica.
I
I'm
got
not
this
fancy,
really
okay?
great. I got this really great diagram here.
She says I need to make like
Where's Scooby?
slideshows.
He'd have it like this.
So like,
So Jess says I need to make
one.
slideshows. I don't know how to do that.
I know I still need to help you with that. Okay, so here's a really great diagram for a visual aid for section 107. This one comes from Barbara Morgan Gardner's book, the one called The Priesthood Power of Women, which highly recommend for every man and woman to read because I think there's a lot of things that we don't understand about the priesthood. And I think sometimes the way that we talk about it in the church is only one way. And maybe it's not very holistic. So that she really covers it in more of a holistic way. And right here, you can see that hierarchical ecclesiastical structure of the church. And something that she talks about in this book and that I had talked about in a little kind of iteration that I did of kind of summarizing her book and a couple of other books in a little series I did called Keys to the Kingdom. I have another diagram where it looks more like a body, but think of this as a body like Jesus is at the head, and then you can kind of see the neck there is like the first presidency and the quorum of the 12.
Mhm.
And then you see this big body where you've got this presidency of the 70, and they report to the quorum of the 12, and then you've got the 70, and then you've got your mission president, your stake president, your bishop, and then look at all these auxiliaries down here. So you have elders quorum president, young men, relief society president, young women, Sunday school, primary, and look at how close they are to the quorum of the 12. It's just bishop, stake president, quorum of the 12. And then you see like your temple presidents, they report directly to the quorum of the 12. Your general auxiliaries, your presiding bishop reports directly to the first presidency. So do you see how closely connected we are? Like in this church, this is a really beautiful structure to me because it makes me feel like I'm truly a part of that body of Christ. And the point that I think maybe is the bigger point is what this is building up to. So in section 107, this is what you're seeing. You're seeing this start to be formed, and that body of Christ, like ecclesiastical hierarchical structure, starting to be put together and restored. And then later, the whole point of having that structure is actually this other structure, which let me switch here. Stop sharing that one. I'm going to share a different one. So what that structure is supporting is this structure. Do you see that? This is what those keys that are about to be restored in Kirtland are going to restore. It's that patriarchal order. And you can see this circular diagram on the left is from Barbara Morgan Gardner's book. And then I just kind of put it into like a little heart and made it cute. And then
All right.
I put something that she talks about, but she didn't fit it on her little diagram. But she talks about how the temple is where these overlap, the hierarchical ecclesiastical priesthood and the patriarchal familial priesthood. And so she has it labeled this way because she says that we should be thinking of the church as what it's been used as by prophets and apostles for the analogy, which is a vehicle and a scaffolding. And that is a vehicle to administer the covenant and ordinances pertaining to that covenant. And then the scaffolding that supports what's central to this whole plan, which is the family. And that's this patriarchal familial priesthood. And so she says to like think of patriarchal as familial and think of hierarchical as ecclesiastical. And I think it's been helpful to me to like visualize this because then I can see how that other structure supports this, what is at the heart of the priesthood, which is the family. And I love it because I feel like this helps me understand the idea of the welding links, the idea of family, and why the family proclamation is so central to God's plan. So there you go.
Right. And Jessica, you and I, we talked about there's this umbrella motif that they use that has come under attack within the evangelical Christian community. I don't know if you guys are familiar
It's the
with
one that
it,
they showed on Scripture
but
Central. It was on Lynn Hilton
yeah, it's the
Wilson's. She
big,
had the umbrella picture. But I think this
yeah,
other one's
it's the
better.
big umbrella. Yeah, I like this one, but the umbrella analogy or the motif is that Christ is the big umbrella. Then under that you have the husband, and then under that you have the wife, and then under that you have the
Well,
children
but
or the
that
family.
the problem with that one
And
though
Wow,
is, and this
wow.
is what I pointed out last time, is that one is speaking to a certain role. It's speaking to the father role
right,
because the father is supposed to
right,
protect, and that's what that is speaking to. So that is almost like a drill down of these other things. Do you see what I'm saying? They're not describing the
right,
same thing. They're drilling down to this is the role of the father. So men, you can think of yourself
right,
in that umbrella, and that would be more of like that brotherhood and that like fatherhood role that men have. And I think that the heart one or the circle one, that's more like the whole family. Like it's describing the whole family role,
hmm
like all of us together connected. And we want to get that going for
right.
each individual family. And the reason why is because then that puts us back in order or connects us back to Jesus Christ into God's family.
Right. Which I like this better than what you have shared because it shows the equity within the church. You know, there's the ecclesiastical authority, as you mentioned, and as we talked about, and then there's the familial authority or the family heritage and the lineage that the priesthood covers in relationship to all of
Yeah,
that.
you see the men and
And
women
so
role
I
working
think
together here, but you see the
right,
protector and you see that kind of like those priesthood keys that are given to the first presidency and the quorum of the 12 apostle kind of acting as that
right.
umbrella. And there's another one that is really beautiful too, which is the one that David A. Bednar gave in his talk, Be Still and Know That I Am God. And he used the bottom up analogy, which was the bedrock of Jesus Christ analogy. And I have a picture of that. You guys can talk. I'll go find it just so people can see it.
Right.
I'll go
You
find
mean
it.
the one where he talked about drilling down by
Yeah.
into
And
the
drilling into the bedrock.
Into the
Yeah.
And
bedrock. Yeah.
and that's a good
Right.
visual. So let me pull that one up too, because all of these little visual aids will help people understand what's happening in section 107. So let me go get that one.
I'm going to say something really fast here. 107 is fascinating to me because, and in the past, I've brought this up a couple other times when we start seeing the church structure become organized in the manner which we have today, back in the 1830s and stuff, and these revelations are coming. What is a bishop? is one of the first things that comes out. And then later you start seeing, oh, well, now a stake president and what a stake is. And here, and when the stake is introduced, it says now there's a presiding first presidency above that, by the way, but there is a stake and these are their duties. Here you have some pretty explicit stuff in 107, right? I know you guys have been talking for a bit and I don't know what was said, but I love how this lays it out really nice, particularly in the latter half of the section, because it says a bishop is over the temporal things and so on and so forth, the first presidency or the highest court and all these things. So it's a reiteration, but in order succinctly in one place. So we're no longer having to go back between different sections or trying to piece things together, because one of my biggest pet peeves, again, I'm repeating myself from previous times, but is people who say, well, the church isn't structured the way that it was revealed to Joseph Smith. Yes, it is. 107 was revealed to Joseph Smith. So, yeah.
You bringing that up, and there's actually the commentary I was reading on that talks about it, because it said specifically. So I'm going to read. I'm not going to show it this time, Monty, since we established that ain't going to work.
I want a picture, Mosiah. I'm just kidding.
But shameless plug. I said I agree with Monty. Scripture Central's hit or miss. When they hit hard, and their commentary on DNC is great. But it says, so when verses 36 and 37 state that the standing or local high councils in the church are equal in authority to the 12 and 70, it must be taken in the historical context. At the time this revelation was given, there was only 2 stake high councils, one in Ohio and one in Missouri, with Joseph Smith leading the high council in Kirtland, and the members of the first presidency. The stake presidency in Missouri was led by David Whitmer, W. Phelps, and John Whitmer. Unlike today, where there are thousands of stakes on every continent except Antarctica, love that they had to specify that. While stakes and stake presidencies and stake high councils play a role in communications, they are not separate with equal authority to the first presidency. This difference does not undermine the importance or the structure revealed to Joseph Smith, but shows that the growing church still follows and adapts to.
Mm-hmm.
I just from looking at Joseph Smith and how he's receiving revelation again, this is all new to him in a lot of ways. Now he's been prepped and primed, but when he looks at different officiators of other churches, he sees people, pastors, and maybe one call a bishop or whatever the names or terms that they would use at the time. For whatever reason, I lost all those, but he still is trying to establish in his own heart and mind, how does this all work? And even though that he's saying the words, is he truly mentally grasping the whole dialogue, where he absolutely just lays it out and says, here's what God said, and now are they having to have these discussions? What are the definitions of each one of these offices in the church mean? So I mean, like I said, I think Joseph Smith is used to getting revelation, but he's still really overwhelmed by some of the stuff that is coming in, format or the instruction for how the hierarchy would be built. And I don't think he's making any mistakes, but I think there's a lot of discussion between those who he respects, as I believe Sidney Rigdon, Oliver Cowdery, and others would be instrumental in forming understanding to this revelation also.
Well, what's interesting is, the movie 6 Days in August.
Is that good?
I watched that, by
Is
the
that
way.
good? I haven't watched it yet.
Well, so
It's really good.
It reminds
good.
you that of the succession crisis, in that, like, because William Marks was the stake president in Nauvoo, he thought he had equal authority at the time, and it's Brigham that they're waiting to come in and really set things in order, because all the brethren that were in Nauvoo at the time were like, no, that's not the proper order of things. The Quorum of the 12 was told that they hold the keys upon the passing of the prophet, as a quorum that we constitute those keys together. Has not these keys of the apostleship have nothing to do with the keys of the stake presidency. Not nothing. The stake president has no keys without them, but we're talking about a hierarchical order that needed to be better understood. To
Right.
credit, he does submit for a time. He ends up staying with Emma, which I don't hold against him really. He was very loyal to her. He was a very good friend. He made sure Joseph's affairs were set in order after his death. He was a great man. But he had a misgiving. And that's just to the point of it got settled then. We need to just sit down and let it be settled now and not argue against how the church is structured, what the operation of keys are, and who holds what keys. Because some people have this idea, I'm not ordained, so I have the same keys the prophet does. That no.
Right.
Sorry.
Well, because only one person has the authority to
Exactly.
exercise all the keys or utilize all the keys, and that's the prophet.
Yep.
And then the first presidency together can kind of work and function. You see that like in the times with like President Hunter when he was sick, or President Kimball when he was sick, and you see his counselors kind of functioning where he couldn't. And I think then you see the Quorum of the 12 has all of those keys together. And that was what I liked about that movie too, is they showed you how confusing it may have been at the time for people, so that you can kind of empathize and have compassion for those early saints, so you could maybe understand how we ended up with splinter groups and kind of people not understanding. A lot of people went with maybe who they knew better and who they trusted, or there was legit confusion, and you can empathize with that. But then when you see I think the fruits, because we're 200 years into this now, like if you can't see it now, you're never going to see it. Like the fruits of what happened there have started to display, like they're on display at this point, and you can see what of that situation grew into what has been closer to all the prophecies than everything else. And there's actually a really good talk, you guys. It's by Elder Faust, James E. Faust, where and there's another one by Bruce R. McConkie, but I really liked the one by James E. Faust because he did kind of explain like that whole history, and he kind of like briefly summarized it. And he basically bore this really beautiful testimony about how we have this beautiful law of divine succession. And Bruce R. McConkie had called it that, like he called it the law of divine succession. And I call it that too, because I think that best describes what it is to me. To me, like I know, okay, first of all, I'm going to complain a little bit. I don't want to talk smack, but I was a little bit disappointed with Scripture Central and how they framed, like on the Church History Matters podcast, which I really love, by the way. Don't get me wrong. I watch it all the time and I love it. But there was just one thing that was irking me when they were doing this whole like divine succession thing, is that they didn't really call it divine succession. They made it seem like there were a lot of different ways it could have gone, and then really only like one or two could have worked. And then they finally drilled down to, well, this is the way the Lord wanted it because Brigham Young and the transfiguration of Brigham Young. And I was like, is it? I was like, because that's not how I read it. And when I look at like talks by Elder McConkie or by like James E. Faust or by other prophets who've commented on this exact situation, I did not see them describing it that way. The way that they describe it is, this is the only way that it was supposed to happen. This is what, yeah, like there's no real room there. It is a law of divine succession, and that makes sense because this is a kingdom.
Because I hear that a lot. It's like if Joseph Smith didn't make it, then we had Joseph Knight. And again, again, we look at reality. Reality is what it is. There is no if in history. Joseph Smith was called, and he was already foreknowledged there that he would complete his task, and because that's the way history provides us that information, that all things happen in the sequence in which God had designed it. You know, it's kind of goes back to the Adam and Eve story. If you read the book of the what is it, the translation of Joseph Smith, it says do not eat of the tree, but do as you will. Like, that kind of language saying, you're going to eat this, but I'm going to tell you not to. So
Yeah,
there,
it's
he
more
was
clear.
he
Yeah.
was already prepared for all things to come to pass. There's no surprise to God,
Right.
to say the least.
Yeah, and I found something very interesting because I have access. I don't know. Have you guys ever heard of Gospel Link?
I
But
think so. I
I
think I
think
have it on.
Monty told me about it actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen it.
Okay. Um. So I found this on Gospel Link here, and this is from the 1992 Heavens Are Open, the 1992 Sperry Symposium on the Doctrine and Covenants in Church History, and this fits in with what we're talking about. And I just want to kind of uh, quote from this real quick because it says our subject today is what the revelations and doctrine and covenants tell us about that restoration. We frequently talk about the restored gospel, the restored church, and the restoration of all things. But what does it all mean? What will the restoration eventually mean to the world? How much of the restoration has already occurred? What does the future hold for us, both in spiritual and in physical things, because of the restoration? And it goes on. But what I find interesting is this part right here, where it says, "This is the kingdom of Daniel to which the prophet Joseph Smith referred. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof." Daniel 2:44 through 45. And it goes on, and this is what I love about this right at the very bottom here. What does the Doctrine and Covenants make known to us about the restoration of all things? The word restoration means that a previous order and system that was once in operation, but which has been lost to the world, shall be reinstituted and become functional again. The Doctrine and Covenants speak much of a restoration or reestablishment of the ancient priesthood, ancient councils, ancient ordinances, and ancient doctrines. So it wasn't just the gospel that was restored, it was the actual functioning authority
Well,
of the
it was
kingdom of
those two
God here on
priesthood
earth.
structures that I just pulled up the diagram. They
Right.
restored, so the ancient order was the family order that was in the Garden of Eden, and that functioned all the way down through like Abraham. And then from Moses forward, you kind of have a different structure. And then from Jesus Christ forward is where you get that hierarchical ecclesiastical structure that we have now. So they're restoring an Old Testament covenant and like structure and a New Testament covenant and structure in this dispensation. And then on top of that, we're building on it. So we're actually going to have things that have never come before. That's like where what it's building up to.
Right.
And there's something really interesting too that I want to point out. So in this, I did a series called Follow the Prophet, which I know is like super generic. I kind of use the phrase just to like irritate people because like people get so annoyed with that phrase, follow the prophet, but I love it because to me, this is like, I think just a really beautiful way of illustrating what you're seeing right here in this little priesthood keys diagram. So this is a slide from my keys to the kingdom. And you can see how there's like the hierarchical ecclesiastical structure where you see like the top down. This is from the old handbook too. Where you see Jesus Christ at the head and it kind of looks like a little body, right? Like a little body is right here. Like you see the head and you see the arms and like this whole body forming. And that's just another way of illustrating that other diagram that I just showed you. But then that's a top down analogy. And there's also a bottom up analogy, which is Jesus Christ is your bedrock. And your foundation is apostles and prophets, which is these bricks that are on the bedrock. And then the covenants are these nice, I don't know, steel rods that go through the foundation down into the bedrock. And they secure the house and the foundation to the bedrock. So there's like top down or bottom up. Either way, you're talking about the same thing. You're just thinking about it in a couple of different ways. This one has more to do with offices and it illustrates all those offices. And this illustrates more of like the house that we're building, the house of God, the family of God that we're building and how we're connected to Jesus Christ. And so hopefully that kind of helps just sort of paint a visual in people's minds of what the priesthood structures look like. And then another thing that I want to point out, and I think this is actually really interesting, but when I was doing this video series called Follow the Prophet, it's like 3 videos, I researched this quite a bit to find like prophetic commentary, like apostolic and prophetic commentary to help explain it. And one of the coolest quotes that I found, I made into like a little quote that I shared all over my social media because I loved it so much. And it was by President Kimball. And he had given this warning to individuals, and it sounded a lot like what David A. Bednar gave in General Conference last year in October when he
Jessica,
was
you pay way too much attention to our detail, and we love it over here.
So remember when he was telling us though that there's only like two, like the only kind of apostasy that we need to worry about is not that the church is ever going to go into apostasy. So when you hear people like, oh, the church is in apostasy, well, then they're probably from like some breakaway group, or they're, I don't even want to get into it. You guys know who I'm talking about. You all know who I'm talking about. Okay, I'm not going to name names.
Hold on,
Yeah.
Jen.
You know
You
who
gotta,
I'm talking about.
There's many names.
no, there's a wide berth here. You gotta narrow it down.
No.
You gotta narrow it down.
There's
Are they a
so
I
many
have
little
no
groups. There's
idea.
Oh,
factions.
brother.
I'm
There's
clueless.
fringes. Go listen to Ahmad Corbett's like fair LDS thing. He like hit the nail on the head.
Mhm.
So in the church today, there's all these little groups who are trying to say that somehow the church is led astray. And Elder Bednar, he addressed this last year when he gave his talk in conference. He talked about how there's only one type of apostasy that we need to worry about right now, and that is individual apostasy away from that structure that we were just looking at, where you have Jesus Christ, your
Mhm.
presidency, and your quorum of the 12 apostles. And that's why we have that quote from Joseph Smith where he said, I will give you a key that will never rust if you will stay with the majority of the 12 apostles and the records of the church. You will never be led astray. And of this, President Kimball, so there's a talk by him, a talk by Bruce R. McConkie, and a talk by James E. Faust, where they all use this quote that Joseph Smith said. And they're doing it for a purpose. It's to illustrate why these keys in this ecclesiastical structure are so important. It's because of apostasy. It's because of widespread apostasy in the world that New Testament church had to be set up, that hierarchical ecclesiastical structure that Jesus instituted with his 12 apostles when he called them was set up. And that's why we have it today. And there's a purpose for that. It's kind of like a temporary purpose. So you think of the analogies, it's talking about a vehicle or a scaffolding. Well, scaffolding eventually comes down, and a vehicle eventually gets you to where you need to go. And I think that that's helpful to me to think of those analogies that have been said many, many times. President Tanner used the scaffolding one. I think Elder Ballard used it. You've got Elder Holland just recently used the vehicle one, I think last year in General Conference. And all of these have been used over time. You'll find them again and again repeated in conferences. And President Kimball said something that's really important. And maybe this is sobering for us as Latter-day Saints, but he talked about how it's only individuals who are at risk of personal apostasy. That's the only kind of apostasy that we need to worry about right now. And David A. Bednar just said the same thing. And he said that all throughout this talk that he gives, he kind of reiterates that this is the type of apostasy that's prophesied in Isaiah and in the book of Revelation, all the revelations about these last days. And he says that, and I thought this was really interesting, but he's like, the heavens would be closed even to our prophets when the people are disobedient to the prophets. And he called it the program of the church. And he said that this kind of apostasy, he's basically saying individual apostasy affects all of us in the church. And it's going to prevent us collectively from receiving revelations. And then he went on, he quoted Daniel 2, the stone cut out of the mountain without hands. They all do in every single one of these talks. That's the revelation that they link the restoration to. And he talks about John and his dream, his vision of what the gathering of Israel looks like, which is what the book of Revelation's talking about. And then he also talks about Isaiah, who's like figuratively describing the same thing, this restoration of this kingdom of God in preparation for the millennial reign of Jesus Christ. And then he links this to Jacob 5, like they link this back to the Book of Mormon, same thing. That whole analogy is about the exact same thing, like the dispensations over time, and then the restoration happens in like it's like the last verses, like the millennium's like the last 2 verses of Jacob 5. And then like I can't even remember. I have it written down like which exact scriptures are what dispensation in my notes on that. And he explains how that there's these like vaults and files of the church, and how there's many things contained in the vaults and files of the church that we're not ready to receive. And when I read that, I was like, what's in the vaults and files of the church? Like, I want to know what's in there.
Have you ever watched Indiana Jones movies?
Yeah.
Hey, so I'm gonna tell you, Jess. We got the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail. I think the Dial
I've seen them all. I've seen them all.
They're under a secret vault under the Washington D.C. Capitol.
Well, we already
as
know
there's no bugs.
that Henry Jones Sr. is a Latter-day Saint.
That's true.
So I have a friend,
Yeah.
my neighbor
Hey,
down the
Indy
street
is
works
too,
in the
then,
church
technically, then.
history. He works in the church history library. And he, in our Sunday school, he just became our Sunday school teacher. And last week when he did the lesson, he actually got pictures of the stuff where these revelations are contained from the church history, and like did like a little slideshow for us. And it was just so amazing, because I kept thinking, man, and like my husband, they've had to take people on tours before of like everything that's under BYU. He works at BYU, and there's tons of stuff there, like so much stuff. And I don't know if we really have access to all of it or even are aware of all of it. It seems like some of that is still happening right now. Like they're working on the Wilford Woodruff papers right now, and think about how many other Latter-day Saint records there are that still need that type of process where somebody can go through it very meticulously and we can learn new things. We learned a lot from the Joseph Smith Papers project, and there's still so much more to come.
Cure chat
bring that
says
up.
accurate home teaching reports.
Yeah, they probably, that's where they are. They go in the vault. They're like the Holy Grail of home teaching. Finally, award.
I want to touch.
Brought up the Joseph Smith Papers, and and we were talking about that structure. And Jess is so smart. I don't want to interrupt, but I was actually talking in Eggy's live today, because we were talking about the passing of President Nelson, and it was like I kind of made the point. I'm like it was like, unfortunately, if you start kind of our president seemed to outlast our apostles. I was like, so watch who the counselors are. I'm like, because I'll bet you they're the ones who are being prepped. I'm like, because I'm finally breaking through. I have the whole physical copy of the Joseph Smith Papers books that have been. I'm finding evidence that, one, Joseph had kind of shown that it was going to be Brigham, and two, Hiram knew and was aware of it. Because
right,
it's like just reading those documents, and so it goes back to, like I said, back to when we were talking the succession crisis. I also think it goes back to what we said, that like Joseph set the way, and not to say Sidney Rigdon wasn't a good person, but it kind of starts to show that ego and that dogma kicks in, because I said, when you actually look, I'm excited for the Wilford Woodruff Papers. I really wish we get like William Clayton and Brigham Young first, but
I know.
Well,
we just have to be patient, guys.
Seeing how Joseph led
I want to kind of go back to what Jessica brought up, because I think this is an important thing that we can discuss here, because she talked about individual apostasy. And I think what a lot of people, and what we're seeing is this individual apostasy that's been happening it seems to me that it's getting more pronounced and more progressive, with a lot of these ideologies that everybody is bantering to they have itchy ears, and they want people to do this thing, and then they're trying to get other people to follow their path of apostasy. And it all comes down to the reality that spiritual rebellion. It begins with spiritual rebellion. The moment you take your eyes off of God, our Heavenly Father, the moment you take your eyes off Jesus Christ, and the moment you take off your eyes from those whom God has called and chosen to give us revelation and instruction and guide us, especially in these times, and you start putting them on yourself, and you start desiring that's what the original sin is all about. It's spiritual rebellion. It is rebellion against God. It's rebelling against his chosen people. And then when you walk in that spiritual rebellion, you are on the road of apostasy. You are on the road of walking away from truth and giving up and forsaking the truth and understanding of that truth. And we don't talk a lot about that, but we see a lot of people coming into, especially social media, and they're like, I used to be a member, you know. It's like, bully for you. Great to know your credentials there, but it doesn't mean nothing because you walked away from the truth. You are an apostate. You apostatized, and they get offended. And I'm like, that you can get offended all you want, but we're going to call a spade a spade. You left the church, you forsake your covenants, and now you're attacking the church. And there's no room for woe is me, pity me, victimhooding, you know. And I know I'm ranting here a little bit, but let me bring it back.
Well, if I can add to the rant before you do, I mean, no one cares about your resume at that point. No one cares
Yeah,
about your
the
Mormon
bona fides.
days
It's like,
if you've left the church. No one does.
yes,
Well,
exactly.
hold on, Monty. Not only do we not care about your resume, that's like that's completely going, here's my resume in arts. I'm applying to be a nuclear physicist.
Right?
Right. But the reality is it all begins with
Judas-
spiritual rebellion.
Judas was an apostle. Do you want to match resumes or what?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't even have to go as far back as
I find that that again, their situation or their mental state is, if I don't attack the church, I'm going to fall apart, because the only way I can hold this line is completely be so negative against the church. So that way that I don't have to face the reality of the fact that it is true, and I'm just stepping away for whatever reason. I think, a lot of times, you hear Julie Hanks left the church.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I was gonna say it, but you said it so good on you.
And one of the I think what's his name, Jacob Hansen, had a little thing that he did, and so I was on there chatting with people, and one of the people said, "Well, I left the church, and now I don't have Jesus Christ either." And there's a functionality between the teachings of the Bible that if you say that you don't believe in Jesus Christ anymore, you're denouncing the Bible, because the Bible is the original place where the LGBTQ community is attacked from. And you can't escape that unless you deny Jesus Christ. Right. And therefore the Bible has no more.
Well,
more
in her
merit.
interview, she said something that I think is so like antithetical.
I didn't want to go that way, but go
she said something that just doesn't make any sense. And I hear this all the time. But she said that back in 2015, whenever the church made that policy where they were making children of LGBT parents wait until they were 18 to get baptized, that this set her off and put her on a path. Now, she was already kind of thinking things, but then this happened, and then that set her on the path. And then she explained how basically from that point on, she was really questioning the authority and the validity of the church, if it was really actually being run by Jesus Christ. And it always comes down to people. It's always the prophet of God, because there's a lot of people who believe the Bible, even a lot of people who believe the Book of Mormon, but they don't want to believe the living prophet. And it's always the living prophet that ends up causing that friction for people. And this is what David A. Bednar said. So this was in his October 2024. It was actually the talk called In the Space of Not Many Years. The Be Still and Know That I'm God one is the one that has that diagram that I just pulled up with the bedrock. But in this, in the space of not many years, I had done like a deep dive on this talk and posted it on my channel because it was so intriguing. He said apostasy can occur at two basic levels, institutional and individual. At the institutional level, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will not be lost through apostasy or taken from the earth. The prophet Joseph Smith proclaimed, the standard of truth has been erected. No unhallowed hand can stop the work from progressing. The truth of God will go forth boldly, nobly, and independent till it has penetrated every continent, visited every clime, swept every country, and sounded in every ear, till the purposes of God shall be accomplished, and the great Jehovah shall say the work is done. At the individual level, each of us must be aware of pride, lest we become as the Nephites of old. And then he goes on, and this is where he kind of like has us look back at certain parts of the Book of Mormon, including the Helaman chapters, and he basically explains how in the space of not many days, weeks, months, or years, we, like the Nephites, could forfeit our spiritual birthright for far less than a mess of pottage. Now, that same conference, that mess of pottage thing came up so many times. That goes back to Jacob and Esau and selling your birthright for something that isn't worth its like moment of peace that it brings you for like 2 seconds, and then you're hungry again.
Yeah,
It's
and
like,
I want to illustrate real quick. The fourth book of Nephi illustrates you don't need social media for there to be a complete collapse of a kingdom that Jesus Christ set up. That social media is not our problem; it's an attitude.
well, and I think too, like part of it, I think it is that pride, right? It's like there's some ego that's happening there, and the ego can be two different things. It can be like I know more than prophets and apostles. I have some secret hidden knowledge to the scriptures that they're misinterpreting the scriptures. They don't understand them. Whatever they're saying is not right. It's not true. They don't get it. I get it. And then there's also the other ego, which is like, I think it's the kind of ego that I've experienced in my life, and this one's harder to recognize. It's because it's the one where you're so broken and you just really struggle with. It's not like, because I've never doubted that the church is true. Like, I feel like I got that testimony as a kid. Like, I understood this at a very young age through very powerful spiritual experiences that I'm not going to share here, but through very hard things that I went through as a child. And before I was a teenager, I had a very strong testimony. I knew that the church was true. But what I didn't know and what I had trouble understanding was, one, like whether or not I could live the gospel, and two, like how I would even like do it. Like, could I do it? And then if I could, like, how do I do it? And I think that these two types of things can really like bug you. It's kind of like Paul when he's talking about like the thorn in the flesh. Like, it can really like start to hurt, because either you're so frustrated or you're so upset that like you know something that they don't know and they're not saying, or you're so frustrated and so upset because whatever they're saying, you just feel like you can never do it. And it just seems like people always seem to fall in like one of these categories. And I'm sure there maybe is others, but these are the two that I noticed the most, where your ego can really take over and it can affect your ability to follow the prophet.
Right.
It's either because you think you can't or because you think you know better, but either way, you're not doing it. And then this takes you right outside of this covenant with Jesus Christ, because they're the umbrella, they're the protection, and they are the neck, right? Like, they're receiving direction from the head, who is Jesus Christ, and they're showing us which direction to be looking. And I think that we need to learn how to trust them.
Right, and the scriptural support for this concept that you're talking about, I think, is very expressly talked about in sections 84, 107, and 121, in the sense that it says that the rights of the priesthood are inseparably connected with the powers of heaven, and the powers of heaven cannot be controlled nor handled only upon the principles of righteousness. That they may be conferred upon us, it is true. And section 84 talks about in the oath and covenant of the priesthood that both men and women enter in to the oath and covenant of the priesthood through their covenants. And so if we're talking about that one specific person, that it may be conferred upon us, it is true. Anyone can take out these covenants and have access to the rights of the priesthood. But when we undertake to cover our sins, gratify our pride, our vain ambition, or to exercise control or dominion or compulsion upon the souls of the children of men in any degree of unrighteousness, behold, the heavens withdraw themselves, the Spirit of the Lord is grieved, and when it is withdrawn, amen to the priesthood or the authority of that man. These sections have taken on a whole new meaning for me this year with studying Doctrine and Covenants. And what you're talking about, I think, is expressly condemned in these sections. Like, and I also find it interesting that in section 107, it starts off by saying there are in the church two priesthoods. And that's a very specific, he doesn't just say there are two priesthoods. He says there are in the church two priesthoods, which goes back to what Jess was saying about the scaffolding and the vehicle, that eventually we will get to where we're needing to go, and someday the scaffolding will come down. But in the meantime, the Aaronic and Melchizedek priesthood is what the Lord is using to change and transform us so we can receive grace to grace what he has in store for us. And I think that these are wonderful things. And here's the big red
Right.
flag in section 121 saying, how do we withdraw the heavens from ourselves? And it gives you the formula. This is how you lose out on all those things.
I came across a church news article that went over that
Right.
exact thing, and it was during my mission back when they actually had the printed church news in their thing.
That we used as toilet paper.
I remember
Yeah.
the printed church news.
But I remember reading an article on my mission, and it was talking exactly about that, about how section 121, and we'll be talking about this in the coming weeks. And I want to go into so much detail because sections 121 and 122 are possibly my favorite sections in the entire Doctrine and Covenants. But you know, talking about like how the priesthood is meant to function, and one of the ways that the Lord teaches us is how it's not meant to function. What does unrighteous dominion look like? Well, here's what it doesn't look like. And he does this so often throughout the
Right.
scriptures, you know, throughout all of scripture, honestly. And one of the things that honestly got me thinking about when you were talking about this, Scooby, was I don't know if you were a part of this conversation. I don't remember. I'll have to go back and relook at the video. But when we were talking, maybe it was just with Jonathan Hayes, talking about the whole Key Clutcher saga with Zion Media, and their whole thing was like, so who would have who would be in authority if well, I guess, you know, at the time it was President Nelson and John the Beloved was there. It's like it would still be President Nelson.
It would still be President Nelson.
Right. It would
President
still
Nelson
be
every
President
time.
How is that a
because he
question?
has the keys.
And now
of-
it will be President Oaks. It's so cool that we have the ability to like point to this right now.
That's if we have a solemn assembly next week, though.
Hmm. Well,
Well,
either
no,
way,
no,
though,
no.
remember but remember what
Yes.
I'll go back
Yes.
to the
Yeah,
top.
no, yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right.
Because the mantle
president-
falls. The
on
mantle
the president of the
falls
quorum of the
on
12.
the president of the quorum of the 12.
Right.
And
So that
the
would be
quorum
President Oaks
functions
regardless.
together with the keys until he's like set apart.
Right.
But
Well,
the statement has some failure in there. I'm sorry. How many members are in the apostleship?
there's 14 now.
Right now,
Yeah,
14.
Yeah, the 14.
Yeah, well, the
Not
quorum of the
quorum, but
apostles.
It
Yeah.
does go back to the quorum,
But
not the quorum
you know
of the
what?
12.
You know what I think is really interesting too, though, is there was a news article today, or maybe it was on the news. It was one of the news stations when they were covering the death of President Nelson. They said basically that they're like, oh, we're gonna have to wait and see who the next president of the church is gonna be. Who are they gonna elect? And I thought it was really funny because I was just like, do they not? Obviously, it wasn't KSL. They probably would have said it the right way, but like it was one of the other stations. It might have been KUTV, but they clearly did not understand the way this works for us. And they're thinking of it as though it's something that they basically were saying that the apostles are going to elect someone else to be the next prophet.
They want to
And
roll the dice.
Right.
Well,
Media,
we don't have a conclave, and that's what people don't understand. We don't have a conclave.
media
Right.
misrepresenting our beliefs? I don't
and
think so.
James E. Faust
Here.
in the talk that I was just talking about, and the one called Keys to the Kingdom by Bruce R. McConkie, they addressed this and they explained that we don't elect the prophet. The mantle automatically falls to the president of the quorum of the quorum of the apostles. It's like the senior apostle is how they worded it. It goes to the senior apostle. Now, the reason that the rest of the world, they probably have a hard time with that. I get why. It's because we live in America. People are always like, democracy, 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 right? But that's not
USA,
what we
USA.
have. We have a kingdom. We have a kingdom. And that's why this talk by McConkie is entitled The Keys to the Kingdom, because this is God's kingdom. It's his governing. It's basically, he's the king and he's got all of his people who are serving in his kingdom an assignment. And this is his order. Like, we don't decide who becomes the prophet, he does.
Right.
And one thing that I just want to kind of bear my testimony of for anyone watching tonight is that one of the things that I love the most about being a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is I know who is running this church. I have no question in my mind.
Right.
And there's one simple way: the law of divine succession. Because only Jesus Christ holds the keys of life and death. Go read the book of Revelation and see who has the keys to the bottomless
Right.
pit. See who has the keys to life and death. It is Jesus Christ. And he is the only one who can control. If you believe that Jesus Christ has all power, if you believe that he is in charge of the world, just like everybody preaches, then you should know that if he didn't want a certain man to run whatever church was his, he wouldn't let it happen. How will you know if he's in charge? It's through that law of divine succession, because there's no other organization that I'm aware of, at least in the Christian world, that has a setup that way where it's clearly God who's in control. Like President Nelson, you guys,
Right.
he lived to 101. He was a prophet who was a doctor during a pandemic. He's the one all about the heart. He's the one all about like peace and bringing us together. And I mean, you look at like the posts that are happening out there on social media right now, and there's people who attended, like that one guy from Lord of the Rings came to Temple Square today and watched music in the music in the spoken word and said all these great things about President Nelson. And he was like, we need more of him, you know, like he's a great man. And it's like he did so much bringing together. I mean, think about the work that he did with like the NCAAP and like all of the different organizations in the world. Like he has like a world status as this like renowned revolutionary surgeon in the world who spoke multiple languages and reached out across nations and bridged America and the church with other countries. And it's like he was the prophet at the right time. And like we were talking about earlier, he was called a day before President Oaks in that order, according to President Spencer W. Kimball, who was not lucid. He was very sick at the time. President Hinckley was basically running the church. And President Hinckley, he had said when there were 2 vacancies in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, he was getting a little nervous because General Conference was coming up. And he was like, hey, if President Kimball comes to you, let me know. Well, they called him in the middle of the night and they were like, hey, he's talking. You should talk to him. And President Kimball was like, I need you to call Nelson and Oaks in that order. And he was lucid enough to be able to give that instruction from God. Okay. And now we have these amicus briefs being filed. This is something the church is always doing, by the way. Like, this is nothing new. The church always does this. They're always about religious freedom and liberty and family. They're always at the forefront of these political things. You know, they are doing the things that they need to do to protect the ability for the church to function and do its job of being the vehicle and the scaffolding that it is supposed to be. And to fulfill those prophecies, we need freedom. And so they are always at the forefront of these things. And the only reason I point that out is because if anybody's getting your panties in a bunch and you're like, oh, why are they doing this? Don't. They've been doing this the entire time. If you didn't notice, go back and read the news about the church. This has been going on for a long time. But I just think it's really interesting because President Oaks, he's a judge. And he's like, my point is, God is in control, you guys. He's the one who decides.
Right.
And he called these men in this order. He's preserved President Nelson's life. I was talking to his granddaughter, who I'm friends with, the other day, and she told me how she felt like his prolonging of his life was like a miracle to her. And to me, it is too, because I mean, he's lived so much longer than most people would. He had a kind of vigor and health that most people wouldn't have at 100 years old. And it's really only at this turning point, which you guys were literally just talking about, that now the torch is being passed, the mantle is moving on. And you can see that the collective prophetic servant, the servant collective, is moving on to the next phase. And I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's a testament to me, and it helps me understand that it is Jesus Christ leading this church, because nobody has control over this. Nobody but God.
Can I ask everyone a question? I want to panel you guys. I'm going to read a statement. This is from someone that claims to be a faithful Latter-day Saint. This is not pointed at Nelson, though. This is pointed at Oaks.
Claims.
Okay.
Claims.
I've been to
Okay.
events. I've been to events where he was the keynote speaker on constitutional law. He is dangerously bad at it and way off the mark from Section 134. He isn't alone. Christofferson's PR statements about marijuana legalization were horrendous. He, Oaks, only supports constitutional law that fits his prejudice and calls all other judges activist judges. He has some deep-seated stuff mentally, which I pray he doesn't bring into his presidency.
This is a far right-wing person, possibly what polygamy denier, probably follows
This is
Eric
a far
Mozo's.
left-wing person in the
Is it a
lobsters.
far left? Because
This-
I see this with
this
both.
almost sounds like someone like a John DeLynn sycophant. Like I don't.
It's like, he
I
sounds
feel
like
like
my
this
mom.
is
He's a
happening.
member, but
Look,
he's always
anyone who views the church through the lens of their politics,
That's right.
instead of their politics through the lens of the gospel and what
Yep.
the program of the church is, this is shaky ground.
Yes.
And this is how it starts. And this is what I think you could hear.
Right.
What's her name in the video we were
Julie.
talking about?
That's exactly what happened to her.
Julie.
Hanks talking about in her story was that she was viewing the church and what it was doing through the lens of her politics and like her personal beliefs, her private interpretations of scripture, which we shouldn't be doing. And I think that this is like maybe a good self-assessment. It's like to stop and ask yourself, like, okay, am I viewing this through the lens of my politics, through my political party? Am I viewing it through my own interpretation? What is the collective witness over time?
And that's
What
my
does
point.
it say?
Yeah. And that's my point, because
Right.
will someone like that actually survive an Oaks presidency that isn't like 6 to 9 months? If Oaks is president for long enough and things move in a certain direction and the church continues after that, let's say then we have Holland, and then after Holland, it's Uchtdorf and Bednar and whatnot, and we know where these guys stand.
Mm-hmm.
Does someone with those kind of leanings who says, oh, I hope the deep-seated stuff they have doesn't leak in, what deep-seated stuff is he going to leak in that he hasn't already been
Right.
explicit about in his talks and what he's already put forward to the membership of the church?
Well, these are the same type of people who have the same type of issues with President Benson and a
Yeah.
lot of his
Being
stuff from before
conservative.
he became president of the church. But the thing is, though, is that his tenor and his message, even when he was a little bit more explicit and more condemning of communism in those general conference talks, still
Right.
carried on to when he was president and using the Book of Mormon. Look out for secret combinations. Who are the secret combinations, guys? Who are they?
Do you
They're
really want me to
secret.
answer
So-
that?
Most
Hey,
part,
hey.
yeah.
So here's my thought on all this, because I'm with Michael. I think there's going to be a short-term prophecy tenure with Oaks.
Why do people keep saying that?
I wasn't meaning to say that. I was just saying
Yeah.
if
It's
last month-
simply because of his age.
But I want to.
you
I
never
want to.
know.
I want to get to. I want to get to something that's very important, because, and this goes back to the reality of this whole idea of spiritual rebellion, secret combinations, and everything else like that. And coming up, there's a couple things that came to mind. Is first regarding the keys. Mount Transfiguration, I've done a study and I've come to the conclusion that when Jesus was transfigured on the Mount of Olives, was it the Mount of Olives? When he was transfigured, it was Moses and Elijah that came to him. Now, Moses had the keys of what?
Wait,
Gathering
how do you-
Israel.
Wasn't it Was it the Mount of Olives? I thought it,
I don't think it was the Mount of
I
Olives.
think
I don't
Mount
think it was the Mount
Moriah.
of
Transfiguration.
I think it was Mount Moriah. Yeah, Mount Moriah. I got them all mixed up. So,
Okay.
So he receives on the Mount of Transfiguration. We don't know exactly what transpired during that, but something transpired, something very significant. And I think it is that he received the keys from Moses, because Moses had the keys to the gathering of Israel, to the restoration of Israel. And then Elijah had the prophetic keys that he had. So why would Christ receive the keys? Now we know that in Revelation, when everything's said and done, all the prophets from Adam on down to the very last prophet of the dispensation, when everything is wrapped up, they're going to be handing their specific dispensational keys over to Christ. Christ then in turn is going to take those keys and hand them over to the Father, which is the kingdom. So this is the kingdom that Christ is handing back over to the Father and saying, here you go. It is completed. The work has been accomplished. And I think Mount Tabor. Okay, thank you. And so, and then my mind shifts over to Matthew 23. Now, this is the Olivet Discourse. This is why I got the two confused. This is the Olivet Discourse given on the Mount of Olives, and it comprises Matthew 23 through 25. In Matthew 23, Christ condemns and pronounces woes upon the scribes and the Pharisees. One of the reasons he pronounces the woes on the scribes and Pharisees is because he brought prophets to them and they unalived them. and they refused to listen to the prophets. And then I was like thinking, okay, where did this all begin? Well, it began with Christ. It began with Cain. When you look at Cain, and I don't think we spent a lot of time talking about this, but Cain became very jealous. And I think there was some aspects of Abel holding to the priesthood from Adam, because Adam was the federal headship of humanity, um, which is a very interesting take on that, because this goes back to what Paul writes, that there are two Adams, Adam and then Christ being the second Adam. And so Adam being the head of the head of humanity, and then he has Abel and Cain, and then Cain gets jealous because Abel's sacrifice is accepted before the Lord, and Cain's wasn't, and Cain became very jealous and consumed with that jealousy to the point that he unalived his brother. Now, when we talk about spiritual rebellion, this is the process of wickedness that is at play, and we're seeing this happening in our modern day and age. That this is nothing new under the sun, and so my point here is that when we look at these things, the prophets and the leaders of the church right now are not being stoned physically, but we are seeing more and more people leaving the church and casting stones against the chosen of God to lead his church, and against us, and these are being insults, these are being lies, these are being deceptions, and it's all because it's based on spiritual rebellion that feeds into the pride and the ego. And then eventually what's going to come, and that what we're actually now starting to see, is people are going to act out of that jealousy, they're going to act out of that anger, they're going to act out of that, and that ultimately leads to violence.
Well, and I think that okay, this is true. So like I think there's two things happening. There's okay, spiritual rebellion is okay, how do I word this? Like, okay, in the war in heaven, you had, I think, the same kind of ideology that you see happening right now on earth. There's this sort of like appeal to authority, that is God's, versus like the what I guess I'm going to use Julie Hanks's word, personal authority. Okay, she would always talk about personal authority. Now, it's true that you have personal authority. I think you can call it agency, would be what maybe the scriptural term is. You have agency, and God is not going to violate that. And it's true that you have the power to make a choice. You guys were just talking earlier about Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and how we get the JST, and how it gives us this kind of clearer view of what's happening there, that there's a choice, but God is still granting them their agency. This is very, very important to understand. I think that the doctrine of agency and the fall, and these two things, like how they work together, are probably similar to the atonement. It's like we don't understand them very well, and it can make a lot of other things skewed, including this concept of priesthood. Because, like this slide that I have pulled up, this illustrates agency and what happens when there's personal apostasy and rebellion, and it gets widespread in the earth. And it says, during his mortal ministry, Jesus established his church, an ecclesiastical hierarchical structure, so that according to Elder Bruce R. McConkie, the church could operate in the easiest and most harmonious way because of the social setting that exists in the world. And the social circumstances of the nations and the governments are such today that we can't operate through families like they did in Abraham's day. You can't have civil and ecclesiastical authority combined, because the great masses of men don't belong to the church. The organizational structure of the church, therefore, went from patriarchal or familial, which is like that father to son, the father being the administrator of those ordinances, to this hierarchical ecclesiastical structure that will administer those ordinances so that we can enter into that covenant. The doctrine of the priesthood didn't change, but the application, or like the procedures, the vehicle, the policy, that's what changed. And the thing that I really like about this book that Barbara Morgan Gardner wrote is that she does such a good job of giving you this history. Like, she explains it all. Like, here she's talking about what we were just talking about, the transfiguration. And she said that, you know, it's important to note that during the time of Christ, even though the main priesthood functioned in the hierarchical church structure, while on the Mount of Transfiguration, Peter, James, and John received their endowments as well as the keys of the higher priesthood from Moses and Elijah and other heavenly messengers. So they're having a Kirtland Temple experience on the Mount of Transfiguration. There's a purpose for that. It's because, remember, when Moses came down from the mountain, the children of Israel were not ready for this structure. They weren't ready to have that patriarchal order of priesthood and that Melchizedek priesthood functioning in their homes. Like, they just weren't ready. But Jesus Christ was a restorer, and he restored that order and priesthood. And then he set up a new structure that could then help us today. And I think that sometimes we forget that these two structures used to be one, like they would function as one. And even though we've got them split out right now, I think that part of what you see is not, it is spiritual rebellion, but I guess what I'm trying to say is it's also confusion. It's like people just simply do not understand this. And I
Right.
think that there are some people who would be okay because they don't have a tendency toward rebellion. Like, you don't hear them saying, well, I'm just angry and I'm just mad and I just want to do what I want. It's like, which is what she was saying in that video, but like, not everybody's like that. Some people, they just don't understand this thing
Right.
that we're seeing. This, like, what are these two priesthoods? What does that even mean? And I think that if you understand, like, the fall and agency and apostasy and how widespread apostasy kind of leads to the Lord having to meet us where we are, similar to how Moses had to meet the people where they were at that time, then we can kind of better understand these things that tend to, like, make people feel so upset or so angry or so hurt. Sometimes people are just hurt,
Yeah.
like they feel like it doesn't make sense or it seems like out of balance. But I think we actually do have a beautiful balance in the church. And I hope that other diagram that I showed can kind of give you a sense of the balance. Like, we have men and women working together, but in the capacities where their talents and their gifts are just, they have the biggest reach and like the broadest scope for completing like the work that the Lord's trying to do. And I think that you see like that divine masculine, divine feminine in our church working together really well. And I do think that it's important to remember that there is a hierarchical structure in the church, but like a co-equal structure in the home. That's the rib analogy that you
Right.
get in Eden, is that we should be together on these things as a husband and wife, as a mother and father. And we should have councils together. Like Elder Valerie used to always talk about councils. We need to do that, because if we think of our home as like a hierarchy, then things are going to get out of balance really quickly. And then you can understand why there's so many people who have a hard time with hierarchy. It goes back to section 84 of the Doctrine and Covenants and that oath and covenant, where, you know, in section 121, where it's like, hey, if you're going to be exercising this like dominion over somebody, then,
Right.
and it's not like a righteous dominion, then you're going to start, inevitably what's going to happen is people are going to be upset and they're going to start
Right.
not understanding what should be happening.
And we talked about this. You and I talked about this when we did our live Thursday, because all you other people except for AJ weren't available.
Well, we were
to
talking
join
about
us.
kind of like that
You got
divine feminine.
We were talking about the complementarianists versus
Right.
the egalitarians. And
Well,
where
the
do Latter-day
complementary
Saints
opposites. Like,
where do Latter-day Saints fall within that debate among evangelical Christians? And if you guys aren't familiar with what I'm talking about, the complementarianist, it's taken from where it's about Eve. I think it's Genesis 6. or is it Genesis 5 or Genesis 6? But it's
I
that
think it
one
was,
specific
wasn't it 3?
Genesis 3, yes.
I think it was
That
Genesis 3.
where Eve would have a desire
3:16.
over her, 3:16, and there's a debate with the English standard version, the ESV, that they've updated, like this is like the 5th update that they've had, and the whole debate is about this egalitarianness versus the complementarianist. Christians, the complementarians see that there's this equity within a marriage, that they're equal partners in this, and then the egalitarians are but the husband is the head of the house of the patriarchal order, and the egalitarians say, this is where the egalitarians say women can be pastors, women can be in leadership. And I think we see and we had this discussion on it, and I'm trying to remember and I can't, so
Well, I placed the link to that full discussion in the description of my video, of my live stream on this. So, I mean, if all of you who are simulcasting this want to just copy everything and paste it on over there, you're welcome to do that. But in any case, we are 10 minutes over. So we gotta
I
wrap
mean, we
things up
started
here.
10 minutes late. We're right on
Start
time.
10 minutes. Well, okay, fine. You want to get technical, but no.
Technically, it was 7 minutes. I rounded up.
right.
But
Whatever.
I just want to answer real quick the question about what does it look like with President Oaks, being that he seems to be more hard-lined on a lot of issues, whereas President Nelson was, what would you say, he was more of a navigator of political problems, because that's what he did.
Well, I
went
think he
through
was a
every-
people person. He was
What's
like
that?
a very, he
He
was like
a
very
people
much a
person, but
people
he was
person.
really very savvy on how to
Mhm.
articulate uh, uh, things to kind of what would you say, not be so like blunt and harsh, because he dealt with a very wide variety of human beings whenever he had to go and teach them uh, surgical procedures and stuff like that. So he's very navigating all that, so he knew how to navigate. And I think uh, President Oaks is going. I'm hoping. Maybe it's because I'm hoping, because I think there's a lack of strength within the church at this time, because we have taken such a soft role on a lot of different issues that shouldn't be softballed.
Well, and I think President Nelson was trying to convey that too, that like, yes,
Mhm.
we should be peacemakers, but not peacekeepers. And
Well,
that
and
was, I
he's the
think, the
one who
central
said
focus.
that salvation is an individual matter, but exaltation is a family matter. And he gave
Right.
like a really harsh talk. I think he's also given really harsh talks on abortion and a
Mhm.
lot of these things, that even like this like feminine masculine relationship. He's talked a lot on Adam and Eve, and I think that him and Oaks are actually like this. Like they're
Oh,
best friends.
absolutely.
They're like
but
best
my,
friends. They're very
but my
close.
But they
perception,
have different approaches.
They
my
do. They have
Right.
perception
different
is just
approaches.
what it is, because that's the perception of many people. Is you'll have Oaks, who's the former judge, who has a very uh, a bite to his words, versus even though that they could say the same thing to collectively, but you're going to have Oaks, who's again a very forward person and everything he says and the
Mhm.
way he delivers it, versus
Right.
President Nelson, who's very soft about the way he delivers
Like the
the
judge
message,
sounds
but the same.
judgmental. Was that what
What's
you're
that?
saying?
Honestly, I think we as a church need another Brigham Young.
We do.
Well,
We do.
let me
Hey,
point out
let's-
this comment on TikTok, since we're live streaming. Thanks to Mosiah live streaming on TikTok. There's a gentleman, Mini 2 Pilot. Oaks is suited for the times we are living in, and then right after that he says, President, or no, Trish says President Nelson is softer, speaking wise. President Oaks carries his gavel, and I'm here for it. LOL.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
think that's what we do need. But yes, I agree. We need a lion for the Lord. We need, and sorry, that's not going to be you, Latter Day Lion.
Oh darn! No, I don't want it. Don't give it to me. Don't give it to me.
But
Well,
I
come
kind
on,
of see
Monty. You know you
Oaks.
want it.
I I kind of see Oaks kind of maybe becoming close to that, because he has been very upfront and some of his talks, he no holds bar, and it would be interesting to see how that turns out and how that comes out in the wash there.
I'll never
But
forget his many of our members do not understand the plan of salvation.
salvation, right,
The way
right.
he said
But
it.
I also have a feeling that when he is instituted as the next prophet, there are going to be many people who are going to be against it. I just
Oh,
there's a feeling that I
absolutely.
have
Well,
about that
that's
because
that's why I
It's-
read the thing, Tim.
It's every prophet.
They're already saying it. It's
They're already, yeah.
it's been everywhere. Again,
Mhm.
like I mentioned on the other stream earlier today,
right.
a lot of these groups that are LDS at least adjacent, if not having several members of the church in it explicitly, are very concerned. I've seen dozens to well over 100 probably comments today of people being very concerned, saying they got a problem with this man coming in. They hope his ideas don't sink in. Chiori had a great comment. He's like, the guy's been I'll shorten it. The guy's been an apostle for 40 years. What do you think he's done? Like, come on, guys. He's been around. He's been influential. He's been influencing everything the church has done since 1984.
Here's an interesting thing that people, whenever, especially with President Monson, he had all these great great stories that he used to tell. But when he became the prophet of God, he really just did not go into that as much. I think there's a real change because even President Nelson, before when he was the apostle, he was very strong and animate about the way he delivered. But once he became the prophet of God, it seemed like there was a whole different transition of how he delivered his messages, knowing that he was responsible for a lot more than just his for those who would basically follow him off the cliff if that's where he takes them, or to the kingdom of God, whatever that looks like. But he had to talk to everybody in a tone that would be fulfilling and accepting under all conditions, and he tried that.
Do you guys think that, like you guys had asked the question earlier about like if I guess it goes back to because you know how people have like their favorite apostles and then maybe they have some that they kind of get.
Graham Richards.
I think this is like a problem with like getting to where you're like speaking against like specific brethren in the quorum of the apostles is that like I remember somebody telling me a long time ago before President Monson became the prophet. It was when President Hinckley was still the prophet, and they were like, "Oh, I really hope Monson doesn't become the prophet because I just don't really like him." And I kept thinking, "What? Why wouldn't you like Monson? He's like all about charity and service, and he's such a nice guy." And it didn't make any sense to me. But then when he became the prophet, this person had a problem with it. And I just wonder sometimes like because you guys were talking about, well, if somebody you don't like becomes the prophet, well, what does that mean? Is that like going to pull you out of the church, or are you going to like kind of ride it out? And I think the thing that I learned from the key that will never rust and staying with the majority of the apostles and the records of the church is that you're just patient. Because if you're not happy with certain policies change, right? And that's why it's so important to understand like the core doctrine and like what's really happening here. What's the bigger picture? Because you can get really caught up in the nitty-gritty and in the details and lost in the weeds on any gospel topic, including policies that the church is setting. Or you can stay focused on the big picture and the end game and keep your eye on that, which is Jesus Christ and what this really is leading up to. It's literally the second coming of Jesus Christ. It's like all things gathered in one in Christ and a millennial era beginning where he comes and supersedes all other governments on the earth and takes the reins like physically in front of us where we don't have to question it anymore. And I think that if we can overcome whatever reservations we have, whatever little criticisms we might feel, and we can stick with the program of the church, like Elder McConkie had counseled us to do and President Kimball had counseled us to do a long time ago, then this is what it means to like stick with the majority and like the records of the church. It's like just stay in the program. Don't depart from the program. And when you have questions or doubts or criticisms, like write it out. Don't be a fair weather friend of the Lord. You know, be there all the time through the thick and the thin, the way
Right.
that he is for you. And be there for his people. Be there for the people in your family and in your ward and in your stake. And don't worry about the role of the prophet. That's not our stewardship. We
And
just
not
stay
and
within.
yeah, sorry.
Go, no, you're fine. Go
I
ahead.
was just say like, and not just like fair weather friend, but don't recreate Christ in your own image.
Yeah.
This is I
Right.
think the majority of the problem many people have when they begin on that road to apostasy. They
Mhm.
just have this idea they cannot possibly be the one who is wrong.
They-
They will be right.
They make God according to their own understanding that they
Yeah.
want to accept and embrace.
And it's the philosophies of men, and it is mostly political, and it is the right, the left. I don't care who you are. You're going to fall in the trap if, as Jessica was saying, and I know all of us here have said it before too, if you allow your politics to lead your religion, if you allow your whatever your ideological premise are in your life outside of the gospel to override the principles of the gospel instead.
Right.
And so
Right.
that's why then people go, well, so as an example, one of these other guys was like, oh, President Nelson getting a hymn in the book before he died was just his way of one-upping President Hinckley, and now he wins the game. Because people talk about how they think those two hated each other. And it's like you've never heard them actually talk about what happened.
That's so annoying when they do that too. Like,
It is.
oh,
They don't,
Well, they're just projecting.
Yeah, it's just
they really are.
like, when you think everything is about power and you've given yourself to the
Right.
theory of power as the basis of all human relationships, and you see nothing but power struggle in every relationship, which is what Julie Hanks does, hence personal authority, you're going to end up in apostasy. Because there's a great line, and I got to go, so I'm going to say this line and go, but it's not even a guy in the LDS church that said it, or a Christian that I know of, but he said it was an artist, and he said, if you cannot die, you cannot be reborn. If you cannot be reborn, and if you cannot submit, you cannot die. If you cannot die, you cannot be reborn. And I have no idea if the guy had any idea of theological training or what's in the Bible, but he said that as an artist, because about like recreating or whatever. But that's just true. You have it because Christ calls us to be reborn.
Right.
You know, and he's talking to Nicodemus, and Nicodemus doesn't know, and he's like, "How are you a teacher of this people and not know this?" And that's the thing. Like, how can you be a member of the LDS Church and not know this? How can you X, Y, Z? And I think they forget it over time as a result of that slow process of apostasy. And
that explains why you even need a living prophet, because again, like the biggest problems that we see out there in these like theological debates is that everybody's interpreting the scriptures the way they want, and they have no source to look to help them. We are so fortunate in the church. We literally have a collective witness from Joseph Smith all the way down. You can do this, you guys. Get out your Excel spreadsheet or your Google Sheets, put a gospel topic on there, go look up every scripture, every commentary you can find, put it in chronological order. There's your collective witness over time.
Yep.
I wanted to illustrate real quick. A lot of people, I mean, you missionaries, I never went on a mission, so you'll have to just take the bite as I deliver it. A lot of times missionaries don't really articulate that people are covenanting with God, not the church. The church is a facilitator of your covenant with God. And you can see this. You know, you think about the house of Israel, and over time it looked like a complete train wreck all the way through. From beginning to end, it looked like a complete train wreck all the time. But yet the Lord honored the temple whenever he did some miracles at the time. Don't matter what, I mean, they didn't have a prophet. If they did, it wasn't somebody that we recognize, but because it's not illustrated in the New Testament. But Jesus Christ saying the power is still there in the temple. You still have to go fulfill the rituals and rites that are for particular whatever. And I think no matter what our church looks like and whether we are what would you say politically correct in every circumstance, that doesn't negate your obligation to God first. And whatever the church manages to destroy or to build up in the best way or the worst way, you still have to fulfill the covenants through the church and its facilitator.
Well, the reason that they bring up Daniel 2 in all of those talks about follow the prophet, and why Elder Bednar brought it up, and why he points to the no unhallowed hand quote, is because if you have studied the prophecies about what is supposed to happen in the last dispensation from the time of the restoration forward, then you have no reason to doubt or worry if you believe the scriptures are true.
Yeah.
Because if you are really truly studying this, and you are listening to what Joseph Smith said and the prophets and the apostles since him have said collectively together as like one collective servant, and you find that collective voice, you'll see what the scriptures are saying is that when this gospel is restored in the last dispensation leading up to the time of the second coming of Jesus Christ, where the millennial era begins, if you live in that time, and it tells you in the scriptures how to identify that time, how to identify that it's Joseph Smith, and then you see it, then you don't need to worry about any of this. You're worrying about the wrong problems. You're worrying about the wrong things. You should be worried about yourself and individual apostasy, just like Elder Bednar said. And every other prophet for that matter.
Real.
Right.
Anyway, we probably should end it here quite frankly, but we've.
Oh, come on. We got 4 minutes. Let's make it an even hour.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that
That's not
Lazarus
true.
thing is a good one, because
Yeah.
that's a really good one, because there's actually, I think, a really important second coming story here for those of you who want to dig into that in a future
Yeah.
time. It's good. These are examples, like all of these things that happen in scripture, just like this thing with Lazarus. There's layers there, and they help you understand that you don't need to worry about all of these things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So yeah, that'll have to be another time, though. We've already
Another time.
another time. Thank you all for coming. And AJ, you're more than welcome to come on back here. The invitation's open.
Just give me an invite whenever you're on. So
sounds great. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and end it here. We'll go ahead and let you guys go, so that way next week we can discuss Doctrine and Covenants 109 to 110, talking about the Kirtland Temple next week. So
right,
awesome
and
stuff.
I'll
My
be
favorite two sections.
Right on, man. All right, we'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
all right, thank you.